Welcome back to another episode of the Collective Institute of Ideas. Today we have Tomasz Starzewski. It's such a pleasure to have you.
My pleasure.
You are beaming with energy, beaming with curiosity. To introduce someone, normally they have a specific field where they've really had an impact, but actually you've worked across different fields, spending a lot of your time in fashion, making couture clothing for the likes of Margaret Thatcher, Princess Diana, and then also having your own interior design business. We're going to jump into fashion though first. How do you think fashion serves people?
How fashion served people and how fashion serves people is two different things. So the fashion that I grew up in and the fashion and why I was inspired to be a designer today is actually irrelevant, because we live in a very different time than why I wanted to be a designer. I wanted to be a designer because I wanted to dress the most glamorous, beautiful women in the world. And that requirement was to actually design clothes that had a functionality and a wearability. And where fashion, the leading designers of that time, their impact on women's lives, how they visually looked, was unbelievably powerful. Today that doesn't exist. You don't have designers that change how women actually dress. It doesn't exist. It doesn't simply exist.
What do you mean by that?
So if you go through the history of fashion from the beginning of the 20th century, you look at Poirot, who basically removed a woman from a corset. You have Chanel, who in the 20s and 30s completely deconstructed clothes. You then have, immediately after the war, Christian Dior putting women back into corsets. You have Dior, and then you can say you have Saint Laurent, who revolutionized fashion completely with putting women back into a trouser suit, putting into safari. And actually at that same time, London, you had the swinging 60s, which for the first time, a girl was not dressing to emulate like her mother. She wanted to dress for her own time. I would say the next important impact would be Armani, who deconstructed clothes, and sportswear, the revolution of sportswear, which wasn't led by a designer. And then in America, you had Ralph Lauren, who gave, by not being actually a fashion designer, gave the American dream, the American aspiration. I can't say in the last 10 years or 20 years that there is a designer who has had such a social impact on how people dress, how women dress, that's changed the high street, that's changed, I can't think of a name that's transformed the lives of a generation of women. And film as well. There hasn't been a film there isn't an equivalent of Annie Hall. Annie Hall completely changed how women dressed, or the influence of Dr. Zhivago, or there were films that had real impact, whether it was the high street, whether it was high fashion, because there weren't that many films. If you go to the cinema, it'd be a one-screen movie house. So for a movie to have that screening, it had to be a major film, it had to be a good film, it was a big deal and a big audience. We have so many platforms to view things that actually the audiences are much smaller. So I dreamt of those women being my clients, and they became my clients.
And just place us in that, you see these beautiful women and you want to dress them. Why is that? What do you want to give them? What do you see yourself getting from that?
So I never questioned the fact that I wanted to be a designer, but my career, my audience happened by default, not by intent. It is that I left St. Martin's, and with my very first collection in the early 80s, I sold to 4 American department stores. I sold to Saks, Neiman Marcus, Bergdorf's and Bloomingdale's, and they were the 4 most important stores in the world. And I didn't know that they were the 4 most because I hadn't been to America yet. And I was, from an American point of view, the European aesthetic that an American wanted. And so that was my initial platform. So for the first sort of 7-8 years of my life, of my career life, I established myself in the States. And then my selling in the UK happened later. That happened in the early 90s. So the 80s established me in the States, and then the early 90s is what established me here. And I suppose the most important thing was my association with the Princess of Wales, is I suppose what established me here in the UK. And the fact that I also went into making day clothes, because my American business was evening wear.
What's going through your mind where you're like, oh, I really want to design something for someone to wear?
I can't tell you
Yeah.
that process, because it's there. It's always been there.
It's always been there, that desire. What do you think clothing does for people?
It's our armour, it's our politics. To me, clothing should be the background for, because I dress women, I don't dress men, clothing should be the background for a woman that gives her the armour that she requires.
You must see that transformation in people putting on your clothing.
Do you know, less now, because I don't distribute. I stopped distributing 15 years ago. My background actually was ready to wear before it became couture.
Right. Okay.
People always assume that I'm couture, but in fact, I was a distributor. The reason I was selling in the States was I was selling to the stores. And then I was doing custom things for a few people, but now I only do custom because the world that I knew as a distributor doesn't exist anymore. I was a brick and mortar designer. I designed and sold to stores, and I sold to stores that actually had staff that had a client base. Even though for me, it was an anonymous wearer, there was someone who was looking after that customer. I remember the thrill of being on an airplane and sitting next to a woman who was wearing a suit of mine and I didn't know who she was. That was really exciting, because it meant that somebody bought it because it stood in its own right, that they desired it. They desired it not because of me, they desired it because of the design. So that was very exciting. I fundamentally dress now people who I know very well. I have a small group of people that I make their wardrobes, but couture in the real true sense doesn't exist. There are very few women who lead the lifestyle that all their clothes are made for them. And actually there aren't the designers that provide that wardrobe. And the price of couture has no relevance to a woman's budget and wardrobe, because the couture clothes that we see today in magazines, they're not even purchased. They're lent. I believe I've always sold my clothes. That's how I survived, is that somebody would order and pay for the clothes. I've never given clothes away. I've never lent clothes. My clients have had to buy my clothes. And that's where the world has changed. And I think it's very hard for young designers today. They don't actually have a patron that actually buys the garment. I don't think that anybody on the red carpet for the Met Ball has actually physically paid for any of those clothes. And I find that shocking. I mean, the most important example, the Princess of Wales, you weren't allowed to give clothes, you weren't allowed to gift. Because you could potentially jeopardize a royal warrant. You build your clients. And that's gone, that's been blurred. So the popularity of fashion has been very muddied.
And
you don't see queue. I mean, I grew up, I remember queuing as a teenager for a pair of jeans. There was an Italian brand called Fiorucci, and they came to London, and I must have been 15 or 16, and they opened a shop in Knightsbridge, and you had to queue for at least 2-3 hours to be able to buy a pair of jeans.
do you think that
The queues went down the blocks to be able to get that pair of jeans, and it was £33 for a pair of jeans, and I think Levi's cost at that time £12, £13, so nearly 3 times. But everybody wanted a pair of Fiorucci jeans. That power is gone, I think, in the same way. But there's an internet power. There's an internet power where a site can crash because everybody wants something on the internet. But I don't think fashion has that power anymore that it used to have. Because it doesn't have a relevance. There's no political relevance, there's no social relevance. It's completely irrelevant to our worlds. If I look at the runway collections, it's irrelevant to the lives of the person who aspires to actually... The aspiration has no practicality. There has to be a practicality. The Saint Laurent tuxedo, when Saint Laurent did a tuxedo, the first tuxedo in the couture collection, there was a woman on the high street who could aspire to wear that. Because it was a black suit with a satin lapel. She could visualize herself somewhere to wear it. And that's very important. For me, that was the foundation of my fashion education. That there had to be a consumer who would want it. My clients would be in the front rows of my fashion shows, and I would be hoping that they would order. If they didn't order, I was screwed.
Yeah, a lot of it's really nerve-wracking,
Because you fought for your audience, you designed for your audience.
And businesses now, a lot of them, they have their customer groups and they're always getting feedback. Was that part of the journey for you?
It was either they ordered or they didn't.
Or they didn't.
There was nothing. There wasn't a customer order. Did they buy or didn't they buy? Did they come backstage after the show and say, darling, I love you, what a wonderful show, I'm having that and that. That's what you wanted. It doesn't exist. I'm not sure that exists anymore. But I acknowledge it's irrelevant. What I'm just describing to you is completely irrelevant today. And I look at it is that I'm now in my 60s, and how many people are given the opportunity to have other careers. And I have 2 other careers now on top of my fashion. I design people's homes. That happened by fluke, but I am a son of an architect. And then I run a charity in Morocco where I'm changing the lives of women and actually children in education by having them embroider for me, and I'm selling their gift. To me, that's rather exciting that I can do different things and to live off it, because it's important. Again, I don't know, I have that sort of driven in me, that there has to be an audience that buys. So I have an audience that buys, and that's important.
Where is the biggest kick for you? Let's say someone comes to you and say, Thomas, design me a dress that's going to make me look incredible. At what point of that journey do you get the most pleasure?
So unless it's a bride, I'm someone that's coming to buy my designs. So I've always had a collection, even if it's a small collection, that someone is coming to order from it. And that's the way that I've always designed. I design a collection, and from that collection, people will come and order. When it comes to a bride, that's a very different relationship, because there my responsibility is to somehow extract the fantasy that woman has of how she wants to look on her most important day of her life. So I have to analyse her thoughts and her inspirations and her visuals that she may have and put together and turn that into a design. So that's the only time that I really... Yes, I've had clients where I've had to specifically design because of maybe for religious reasons or state reasons or whatever, or because that person's... So Lady Thatcher, I designed everything for her because there was a structure and a necessity for somebody who was in the public eye, and it was always for giving a speech, giving a lecture, travelling around the world. You couldn't compromise and give a bad picture. So there were restraints in what you could do. Colour has a very big political impact internationally. Whether it was her or Princess of Wales from in the UK, those are, I suppose, the 2 most important for me, where colour also had its political significance, or a religious significance, or a significance of sorrow or celebration or whatever. So there was a lot of thought behind it. But you were also working with a team.
Do you miss the clothing, the one-off pieces? Do you feel
No, because
a
I
sense
still
of
have a
relationship?
fantastic group of clients. What I miss is I miss the shows, and I miss that adrenaline of putting together a collection that would then be distributed and manufactured. That there are times that I miss, but actually I don't look backwards, I look forward. And I've got other things that are high. I mean, we just finished a house last week that we've been working on for 2 years. And on Wednesday it was finished.
And is it looking back at that house that is the most satisfying, seeing it all done?
I'm always on to the next project. So actually, once I've done, and then I'm thinking on to the next thing. Because also with my interiors, I become the client. I always think I'm psychotic decorator in the sense of that I've just finished something that actually was so heavily steeped in Gustavian, whereas then the previous client could be early 20th century, then another client. It really depends who the client is. Again, in decorating, my role is to create the box that sort of allows that client, their collection, their point of view. I like my clients to have a point of view. So I'm not very good with somebody who doesn't have a point of view.
Yeah, that's interesting.
In my interior, I work quite a lot with people who are collectors. So I then very much take the second position, and my role is to make that collection look sensational. It's not me imposing my complete aesthetic. My home, where you're filming me, is my aesthetic, but I wouldn't do this for anybody else, because this is actually it's steeped in an element of my heritage, of my childhood, there are things here of my parents, there are things here that have a historical importance to me, and then there are things that is actually young and its kids and its students. So it's me, that's not what I will put to somebody else.
Thinking about moments for you, looking back, what are the moments that you feel were the biggest highs so far?
So I suppose the first high that I had was doing the wedding of Charles Spencer to Victoria Lockwood. My second high, of course, was dressing the Princess of Wales, who bought a dress, the first item she bought, without me knowing. So when I saw that in the papers, I thought that was amazing. Then there was somebody in New York who, since I'd been very young, was always on the best dress list, and a woman called Nan Kempner, and then when Nan became a client and a friend, I knew I made it in New York. And when she was photographed, because that to me was the ultimate. In terms of designer, that was for me the ultimate. Because there wasn't anybody in London who was important in the couture world as a customer. It was either French or it was American, and the French weren't going to come to... They came in the end. In the end, I got some of the most important French couture clients because there was nowhere to go in France. Everyone had closed. And the only one who remained had been Lagerfeld. And if you didn't like Chanel, you weren't going to be buying Chanel. Then my first public building, when I completed the interior architecture of Chiltern Street, 66 Chiltern Street, that was for me, I thought, I wish my father was here to see it, as I didn't want to work for my dad. I didn't want to go into my father's practice. I've always had a complicated relationship with architects. They're very dictatorial. So that was really important for me. And now I find it immensely rewarding that I'm changing the lives of a community in Morocco, and the fact that by selling their skills, I'm changing education, changing a child's life, hopefully. And I've reached that point in my life where you've got to return anyway, you've got to give back. I've just done 2 weeks of Christmas fairs where we have sold out, and I'm so proud of the girls. I'm so proud. Yeah. I'm so proud and the fact is that it was a gamble. I thought, oh my God, have I taken a huge risk? Have I spent too much money? But actually, we sold it. We sold out. So that was thrilling. That's really thrilling.
Yeah.
And I'm working out now the next program for next year, and And I'm looking at my projects for next year. So I'm always looking at what is going to be my projects for next year. What have I got? What have I got in the pipeline? Hopefully we're starting a project on a new house, on a new sort of residential. What are we doing with the charity? What weddings have we got coming up next year? I like to know some of my commitments, that it's not just, and also we're living in a very complicated time here. I've lost a lot of my friends have left England, a lot of my clients have left England. This exodus that's been going on for the last few years, it has certainly hit London very badly. And so I'm aware I'm catering for a very rarefied world that is getting smaller and smaller here in the UK.
And jumping into interior design, what do you feel is really true about how a home should feel?
A home should feel that it should be the identity of the owner. That's the most important thing. A home shouldn't be the identity of the decorator. There will always be a client who wants the identity of the decorator, but there's also a client who wants a home that doesn't look as if it's been decorated, but they need a decorator. You've got the two extremes, and I hope comes somewhere in the middle.
You meet someone on a tube, and they're like, "Oh, I'd love some top tips for interior."
I'm not going to meet someone on a tube and go, that's not going to happen. But you're always asked, yes. You're always, and I have some really great friends who are legendary decorators, and it always amazes me how they're being asked for that advice and they're expected to give it for free. And it's quite funny to watch it. And then it's ignored. And then the advice is ignored. It's very easy to make it, I always laugh, it's easier to sell a £10,000 dress than a £10,000 sofa. Because a £10,000 dress, if you've made a mistake, it goes into the cupboard. But you can't do anything with that sofa, it's there. So I actually think that you see the insecurity of clients more in interior design than you do in fashion, because it's a commitment that is going to be there thrown at you. You're going to be looking at it every day. And it's really interesting that. It absolutely surprised me. It never crossed my mind.
That's fascinating, because it's very unusual, the nature of designing these clothes, couture clothing for people, but also doing interior design for people.
I'm quite architectural in my fashion. If you look at my clothes, they're quite architectural. So I've always considered myself an architectural fashion designer. I grew up in architecture, so the thing is that I can't separate, and I grew up in fashion, I can't separate the two. That was my childhood. Look, I had a father who was an architect who had a practice, and I had a grandmother who came after the war to England, and a grandfather who never worked again because he owned newspapers, and my grandmother had to start work in her 50s. And so she decided to open a workroom and go to Paris and buy from the haute couture and have the right to reproduce. That is how it worked in the 50s and 60s, and it petered out by the late 70s. So I was being fed visually by these two mediums. So for those two mediums to have an impact on me, it doesn't take a lot to work that one out.
You know those little moments that lift your day? A smile, the sun coming out, or a piece of chocolate. Audrey's Chocolates have been handcrafting chocolate for over 70 years. Chocolate to die for. It comes in beautiful boxes that make for the perfect gift. Or bars of chocolate that feed daily joy. Discover your moment of joy by visiting audreyschocolates.co.uk and treat yourself to 10% off using the code TheCollective10.
And also I was very much brought up on French fashion. Architecturally, complicated, because I actually disliked what my father designed. My father was mainly involved in town planning, and that post-war generation of architects here in Britain, and actually really in Europe, their role was to rebuild a destroyed country, a country that had a lot of homes destroyed, and there was great shortages. There was a lack. There was a lack of metal, there was a lack of timber, there was a lack of, and one had to house people. So that imagination, that freedom, that spontaneity, didn't really happen here with that generation. It really only happened in the States because the States had never been touched. So you had a generation of talent that had been suppressed in many ways.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
And in a way, because that boom, it didn't happen, that innovation, I can't say that England is really known. Yes, it has Richard Rogers, it has
Norman
Foster. That's the next generation of architects who've had an incredible impact, but actually that impact hasn't been really in the UK. That they don't have their landmark buildings are actually outside of the UK. But you go and look at the skyline of the city, and it's phenomenal. And it's modern, and it's new, and it's different. But that's the last 20 years where there has been innovation, there's been fantastic building. But we don't have that combination of France, like Paris. Paris has that mixture of old and new. Italy, probably the best. Italian architects are the best in the sense of that they will embrace something that has survived 600-700 years and combine it with something that is contemporary. Yeah. And it also respects that conservation. We are so obsessed with conservation that actually we sometimes neglect innovation, and that the two can actually sit very happily together. We never got built at the V&A the extension that won the prize. Everyone chickened out at the end. And in terms of design, it was cutting edge, it was fantastic, it spoke of its time, it wasn't a pastiche. And instead we have a pastiche. What actually won never got built because no one had the guts. But we're still a beautiful city. London is an incredibly exciting city.
Speaking of exciting cities, there must have been, for you now, so many unusual moments and situations you're in, or places, working across the world for different people. Tell us about some of those unusual moments.
I'm not sure how much any of us really step out of our comfort zone. And I think that my life is very much 6 degrees of separation, in the sense of that my world in New York was very much, there was always a connection. My life in Washington, there was always a connection. My life in Paris, same thing, is wherever I have friends, wherever I spend time. Even Morocco, I have a lot of friends there, but they're people who are living there who I've known for 30, 40 years, or have a mutual friend who I've known for 30, 40 years. I've reached that point of my life where new friendships, I think as you get older, we have a tendency not to make new friendships because history becomes our glue and our comfort zone. But what I feel that's really important as you get older is in fact that you're surrounded by younger people. So I'm surrounded by a lot of my friends' kids are friends of mine. My godchildren have a very important role in my life. I want to know what you guys are doing. I want to know how you're thinking, how you're looking, how you're interpreting. And as you guys want to know how I look at it, or what I did, or how I find your generation incredibly conservative and very safe and apprehensive and concerned about the future, whereas at that point of my life, I just wanted to have a good time. And I never thought about the future, I only thought about the present. So I had a very different outlook in my 20s than your generation, or the next generation. Or even in my 30s, I wasn't looking at the future, I was looking at it very much at, it didn't cross my mind. But each era is different. It's completely different. And each era cannot be tainted with the past. I can be a participant today, but I can't be a leader. I'm the wrong generation. I can participate in what's happening, but I'm not going to lead what's happening because I'm tainted by a baggage of the past. And I'm very conscious of that. I may use the tools of today, which don't come to me naturally because I've got the tools of the past that hinder me. And I'm very conscious of that and appreciative of it, but also I can bring something of the past to show somebody of the future how to possibly incorporate it in a very contemporary new way.
When talking of participating in the present world and, you know, how you like to look at and spend time with people who are in younger generations, walking down the street, do you get excited about fashion?
Fashion has been something that I've enjoyed. I've enjoyed designing, but fashion has actually never been 99% of my life, because I've actually always been interested in a whole lot of other things. And fashion has never intellectually, it's never stimulated me in the same way, intellectually or emotionally. A piece of music will emotionally touch me. A piece of fashion, not really. I look at fashion as a functionality. It's a piece of clothing that we require to wear clothes. We live in a society that requires clothes. We also wear peacocks, where we have a vanity. We want to look beautiful. We want to look attractive. We want to look manly. We want to look seductive, whatever. My role is to create that armour. And sometimes I'm privileged enough to design something that is very beautiful and that people are taken aback by, they love. But I always recognized that I would never change fashion. I knew I wasn't going to transform anything. And when I was at college, my childhood baggage of fashion, which was Paris, was actually irrelevant at that moment because it was the time of the Italians and the Japanese. And in fact, ready-to-wear was more important than couture. And so I struggled at St. Martin's because I wasn't interested in Armani or Giorgio. I was still interested in Saint Laurent, which had no impact at that point. It was over. It was already over.
When people buy clothing, part of that is to fit in.
Yes,
in a room.
It's supposed as a uniform. It's always been a uniform. So people want to belong, and their clothing gives them the armour to belong to that herd or that group or that.
Do you wish people express themselves more with clothing?
There are women who I've known or have known who actually, I think, are so unbelievably original and stylish. And I would never actually possibly even dress them. But there's something about their point of view that is so unique and so special. And I admire and was fascinated by how they look. But that's rare. There are very few people who are that individual and that unique. So that aesthetic, that sophisticated aesthetic, it's unusual. You don't come across it very often.
Do you wish people look to dress themselves for themselves more?
I'm not sure that's possible. It takes enormous confidence to just dress for yourself. Women dress for women, predominantly. And then there are some women who dress for men, but women primarily dress for other women, not for men.
Talk to us about what you mean by that.
So a woman wants another woman's approval that she looks good. That's the predominant. And then there are a few women who wish to capture a man, so therefore they're dressing for the man. And it's a very different psychology. It's a different provoking. It's an entrapment. It's a seduction. And actually it alienates her against other women because it's territorial. It's not heard. Men, peacocks, dandies, attention. It's very rare to see an incredibly well-dressed man being married to an incredibly well-dressed woman. Too much competition. It's quite funny, particularly here in England.
Tell me what you mean by...
If you see a man who's incredibly well-dressed, let's call him a gentleman, it's rare for his wife to be a beautifully dressed lady. It's too much rivalry. There's always one leader. It's quite funny.
Interesting.
But then you have the exception where you do, but there's always that dominant.
That's such an interesting observation around people through clothing. Are there others that you can think of
Yes, because there's clothing for leadership, there's clothing for, so in fact, dressing somebody who is a public figure, you have a completely different responsibility in what you're putting them into, because in fact, you require for part of that necessity, that person is to draw that attention. They can't become invisible.
But Diana, working with her...
You never saw her in dark colours, you never saw her in dark, muddy, nondescript colours, because she needed to be seen. The audience needs to see that public figure. Look at probably the most important person, the Queen. You never saw the Queen in sludge.
Because
the public demanded to be able to see the Queen. So the Queen was always bright and shiny and sparkly. Because if she wasn't sparkly and shiny, she's not a queen.
With Diana, how much room would she give you to design what you wanted for her?
She never actually had anybody design anything for her. She came to look at the collection, tried it on and bought it. She didn't have that imagination. And in fact, if it didn't work straight away, she wouldn't purchase it.
Was she very confident in her own view on what to wear?
Yeah, because she chose from the collection. You put it on, if she liked the look of it, she'd buy it. I did not dress her until 1989. And then I dressed her from 89 until she died. And the thing is that in the early years of her marriage, I think she did try things that were designed for her, and they didn't always work. And by the time that she came to me and I was given the day wear budget, I never did her evening wear, that was Catherine Walker, and her day dresses, she had learned that if it doesn't look good straight away, don't touch it. And that meant that she was guaranteed a good picture. And that's very important. That's from a designer's point of view. If you're dressing somebody who's a public figure, you can't compromise them by giving them a bad picture. You're not going to be arranging that person on a red carpet. They're walking into a hospital where there's been a tragedy and they are there to inspire, and they're not there to be looking at their own clothes, whether they look right or wrong, and a stylist is there behind them. It doesn't work like that. That's a different world. That's not a world that interests me.
Are there observations around people that you feel don't get enough thought around? For example, things that people might need, or how we communicate?
We don't need anything. Look, I deal in a very spoilt, indulgent world. I satisfy a tiny section within the social sort of spectrum that exists. It's tiny. I'm irrelevant. I actually think in that sense I really am irrelevant. It's a very rarefied world that I satisfy and that I'm interested in.
Is there an item of clothing that you haven't designed that you want to design?
Yeah, I've done an opera. I'd like to do an opera. I'd like to do Traviata.
Does it matter where that would be?
Ideally, I'd like it to be the Opera House here, as it's my favourite place, or a ballet.
What do you feel are the components that enable you to come up with a design?
There's a brief. Even if I'm creating that brief for myself, I may say that I'm going to be influenced by some figure from let's say Edith Sitwell, that's going to be then mixed up with, I don't know, 19th century Japanese geisha. I don't know. It could be actually that for me. It's been the Viennese session. I've had different influences for collections that have inspired me. It really depends.
How impactful is being able to design and express your creativity in terms of you feeling connected with yourself?
I think one's got to be in a good place to actually be creative, but I don't actually look at it in that moment because I don't have the time to think about that in that moment. I want an audience that's going to inspire. So I think anyone who's creative feeds off an audience. Without an audience, we have a tendency of going stale and also not evolving. It's very easy not to evolve. And actually, fashion is about youth. So in a way, I've also acknowledged that, and that's why I'm not in ready-to-wear, I'm not doing wholesale, I'm not distributing, is fashion has to be youthful. There has to be a youthful point of view. Because when I was 20, I was thinking how I was going to make a 40-year-old woman look young. I'm 60, So what, I'm looking at an 80-year-old woman who's going to look young? No, and I'm not going to understand how a 20-year-old wants to look young. It's not possible at 60 to do that. It's not possible to think like that because you're not in that groove, you're not in that vibe of that moment. You're not being influenced by art, by music, by the things that are so essential at that point of this time, which all have an impact artistically.
What do you want to see more of in homes or in clothing? On clothing, when you walk on the street?
I can't look at it that way, because I look at every house that I do as a completely different, unique project, and I don't know what my catalyst is going to be for that project. I've done an apartment where the collector collects two things she collected: chairs and Japanese basketware. From the Viennese Secession to the present day in chairs and Japanese basketware by masters. Very specific. I had to collect the environment for that. Another person that I've worked for, Memphis Furniture, which probably means nothing to anybody, which is Formica, for movements in the 70s and 80s, with signed 17th century French furniture. Couldn't get more opposite. And that to me is a turn on. That's a challenge. That's interesting. That's an interesting client. That pushes my buttons. Is can I get into that psyche and honor it and come up with something that will satisfy these very strong points of view. So I like very strong clients. I like very strong personalities. I like a client that has a real point of view.
Has there been someone that also a strong force where you've just worked on a project? Maybe it's been a friendship you've had over the years, but where you've both managed to fight each other in a constructive, exciting way, but also be a team in a beautiful way.
You have to fight, you have to respect. You really have to respect.
Have you found yourself finding this amazing bond with someone who thinks in a different way? You have mutual respect, but you can fight it out in a loving way and have created something beautiful together.
Yeah, I think I've had quite a few people like that. I've been privileged to have that. That's what I attract. I particularly attract that in interiors, is a strong personality. And we will both fight a corner sometimes to get the best out of me.
Yeah.
I can be very stubborn, don't deny it. I can also be very proud. People learn very quickly. Give me 24 hours to rethink it. I'll come back. I will say I'm sorry. I will say you're right. But I need to digest it. I have a gift of visualization, and it's a great gift to have. I'm aware of that. In my imagination, I can see the room, I can see the space. I'm a dyslexic, and I think that my compensation as a dyslexic is that I have a visual memory. I may not remember the words that I've read, but I will remember the visual. I'll remember what your mother wore 30 years ago. That's why I have fantastic visual memory of places. I even have visual memory of sound, but I won't be able to tell you what that piece of music is, but I remember the beat.
Really?
When I hear the opening bars, I will say, I know that.
Fascinating.
But I always think there is no such thing as a handicap. So I look at it as a dyslexic. I don't have a handicap. I have other gifts that compensate the disadvantages.
It's just about tapping into those and being positioned that they can be utilised. And you're clearly...
And also I have lateral, as a dyslexic, I have lateral logic.
Yeah.
It's a different logic. The way I find a solution, it's very quick, but it's a lateral logic.
Yeah.
I'm doing the puzzle, and I like puzzles a lot, but I think of a puzzle as a dyslexic. It's a lateral logic.
You're clearly also someone who's very intellectually hungry.
But that was demanded for me. I think that's the greatest gift a parent can give a child, is that intellectual curiosity. I had parents who demanded that curiosity. I had a grandfather who demanded it. But we're actually talking about it on Monday night. So twice a year, there's a little group of us that have all known each other sort of 30, 40 years, get together. And we're talking about our holidays, of how we holidayed as children. Every year would always be the same holiday. the same place. And I said, every year I'd meet my grandparents in Venice, and we'd have 2 weeks of museums, ruins, culture, galleries, and then 2 weeks of beach. Completely different. And that's why, for me, the Colosseum as a little boy was so exciting, because I could imagine the gladiators, or going to the Louvre, or going to Versailles, or being fed, visually fed. So that to me is a gift that a parent or grandparent can give a child, because you're nurturing something. And there are people who aren't given that gift. They discover that later on in their life as they grow, as they become older, or they discover a book. Or today they'll find it because they'll go down a rabbit hole in an algorithm on an iPad. That suddenly, culturally or musically, they'll be affected. So it's a complicated time. News and information is being thrown at us at such enormous speed and from so many different sources. There are moments that I can't tell on Instagram. Is it real or not? I've reposted something and then realised it's fake. And also the power of visual information. Why am I incredibly busy with weddings? It's because I had an Instagram post that went viral. I did a wedding in Venice and it got 2 million hits.
Tell us about that.
It's captured a moment of what your generation considers as classical beauty. I did a wedding in Venice of a beautiful girl, and I dressed her in a very classical way. And when I look at all the compliments, it's always referring to the same person, Grace Kelly. So this is what considered the new Grace Kelly of today, which was a classical beauty. Interesting. How was I to know? None of us had any idea that something like that would go
And that's
viral.
on your Instagram?
And that was on my Instagram.
Yeah.
And as a result of it, we've had the most extraordinary number of appointments. And that's why I'm incredibly busy in fashion, is because of one post. Who was to know that? That I find weird, amazing. It's very complimentary. It's very nice to have a young audience thinking you did something really cool. So I'm having an interesting moment in my career when I thought it was all over. It's suddenly it's gone crazy.
How do you deal with that?
We go in and I go, because the person who runs my life and runs my shop has known me since I was 13. And we look at these emails and we think, really? This is quite, it's astonishing. We're astonished. It's very flattering, because when I said earlier, every artist requires an audience, and an audience that responds positively. It kills you if you don't have an audience. That's the worst thing that can happen to somebody who's an artist in some way, artistic in some way, that there isn't a public response that wants that creativity.
It's that connection.
If you don't have that connection, you wither away. And that's what's tough in life. That's very tough as you get older. And fashion, so I say to you, fashion's for the youth, you become irrelevant. So, because you're not young, you think you're jaded, your creativity's been jaded. So to be suddenly revived and suddenly rediscovered, and people wearing your vintage and something that you don't consider vintage because you remember when you designed it, it's different, it's a different outlook.
The world has surprises in store for everyone.
Always. Life is a continual surprise. Life is unexpected. And if you allow it to be unexpected, it's very rewarding. And I think you've got to be open. You've got to be open to an adventure. I haven't finished my adventures. I've still got things to discover. I still got things to design. I've still got experiences that I've not yet experienced. My best days are yet to come, I think.
I love that. Thomas, we're going to move to the quickfire questions now.
Go on.
3 things that give you joy.
Ballet, opera, and food.
A mantra you want to embrace now would be?
Life's a continual adventure.
I know in Russia you've got these idioms and these sort of very unusual way of phrasing things. Are there Polish ones that are?
I'm not a Pole and I'm not English. I'm neither one or the other. I have a Polish emotion, but I have an English education. So it's very I'm a schizophrenic there. My sentiment is Slavic. My public persona is very English.
A favourite book, film or artist that isn't obvious?
I, Claudius and Claudius the God by Rupert Graves. Murder, corruption, politics, history. You couldn't write it in fiction.
Something you want to learn more about?
Music and dance and singing.
You can add one thing to your bucket list today. What is it?
I don't know Asia. I need to go to Japan.
Something you wish you knew when you were younger?
Speed of life. Actually, forgiveness.
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 What do you mean by that?
I think when we're young, we're very black and white. We don't discover grey until we get older. I was more intolerant when I was younger. I'm much more tolerant as I'm older.
How do you think people can tap into compassion in a more efficient way?
I think compassion is very complicated because not everyone has empathy, and you can't manufacture empathy. It's quite interesting because if someone has a stroke, they lose their empathy. It's one of the things that you lose when you have a stroke. So your emotions disappear if you have a stroke. But there are some people who just don't have empathy, and then there are people who have empathy. There are some people you can be accused of it. In fact, your emotions get into the way of your rationale. I may be considered too emotional because I am very emotional in the sense of I'm very loyal. I have staff who have worked for me for 40 years. It's very rare for that. 4 people have worked for me for 25 years. I have very loyal staff. Their families, very different dynamics, it's different emotions. I get upset by the people who work for me on an emotional level, not a pragmatic, logical level. So emotions are important for me. Empathy is important for me. There's a moral code that is important for me.
Thomas, we're going to finish there. What a privilege it's been. Thank you so much for allowing us to ride with you with the lateral brain into so many historic moments, so many topics, thoughts and ideas to think about.